When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. We were standing in the kitchen. The afternoon light came through the window in a soft, tired way, as if even the sun was unsure how to feel. The kettle had just finished boiling, and its quiet click sounded louder than it should have. I remember thinking how ordinary everything looked, and yet my life was quietly shifting. She did not raise her voice. She did not look angry. Her words were calm, almost careful. She said, "I think it would be better if you stayed somewhere else for a while." For a moment, I did not understand. I stood there holding a cup I had not filled yet. My hands felt warm, but my chest felt empty. I looked at her face, searching for something I might have missed. A sign, a doubt, anything. There was none. So I smiled. Not because I felt strong, not because I agreed, but because I did not know what else to do. I nodded slowly, like someone listening to bad news they already suspected was coming. I said, "All right." My voice sounded calm, even to me. I surprised myself. Inside, something folded in on itself, quietly, without sound. This was the house where I had cooked meals every morning, where I had folded laundry late at night, where I had sat at the table waiting for my son to come home. And now, I was being told gently, politely, that I no longer belonged. I did not cry that day. I waited. I waited until the evening, until the rooms felt bigger than they used to, until the walls felt like they were listening. That was when I realized something I had never thought before. You do not always lose your place with noise. Sometimes, you lose it with a soft voice and a simple sentence. And sometimes, the deepest pain comes when no one shouts at all. My name is not important. What matters is that I am a mother. I became one many years ago when my son was born on a quiet morning. I remember holding him for the first time, feeling the weight of his small body, and promising myself that I would always be there for him, no matter what. His father passed away when my son was still young, too young to understand why his father never came home again. From that day on, it was just the two of us. We lived in a small house back then, nothing fancy, but it was warm. I worked long hours. I woke up early. I came home tired, but I always tried to smile for him. I wanted him to remember laughter more than struggle. At night, we would sit at the table together. He would tell me about school. I would listen, nodding, sometimes pretending not to worry when money felt tight. I learned how to be strong in quiet ways. As the years passed, my son grew into a kind man, a thoughtful man. He spoke gently. He carried responsibility in his eyes. And when he told me one evening that he had met someone special, I felt two things at once: happiness and fear. I was happy because he sounded hopeful. I was afraid because I knew my place in his life was changing. He spoke about her often. He said she was smart, that she understood him, that she made him feel calm. I listened carefully, trying to imagine the woman who had taken root in his heart. When I finally met her, she greeted me with a polite smile. She spoke softly. She was respectful, but distant. Her eyes did not linger. She did not ask many questions. I told myself she was shy. I did my best to welcome her. I cooked meals I thought she might like. I gave her space. I never interfered. I wanted her to feel safe. I wanted her to know I was not a threat. When they married, my son asked me something I did not expect. He asked me to live with them. He said, "I don't want you to be alone." I hesitated. I worried about being in the way. I worried about causing tension. But he insisted, and I trusted him. So I moved into their home. At first, things felt peaceful. We ate together. We shared quiet mornings. I kept to myself. I reminded myself every day that this was their home now. I was careful. I watched my words. I moved softly, like someone afraid of breaking something fragile. Slowly, though, small things began to change. Conversations would stop when I entered the room. Suggestions I made were ignored. Sometimes she would correct me in front of others, smiling as she did it. I told myself not to take it personally. I woke up earlier than everyone else. I cleaned quietly. I tried to be invisible. At night, I sometimes heard them talking behind closed doors. My name would float through the silence, like a word that did not belong there. I never stood close enough to listen. I was afraid of what I might hear. One evening, as I passed the hallway, I heard her say, "I need space." My son replied, "She's my mother." There was a pause after that, a long one. No voices, just silence. I went to my room and closed the door gently. I sat on the bed and stared at my hands. They looked older than I remembered. I wondered when I had started feeling like a guest in my own child's life. I did not say anything. I believed silence would protect me. I was wrong. The days after that quiet pause in the hallway felt heavier than before. Nothing obvious happened at first. No arguments, no harsh words. But the air inside the house began to feel tight, like a room with closed windows. I noticed it in the small moments, in the way my daughter-in-law no longer met my eyes when we spoke, in the way she rearranged the kitchen without telling me, placing things where I could not easily reach them. I told myself it did not matter. I reminded myself that homes change, that people need control over their space, that I was lucky to have a roof and a family. Still, something inside me stayed alert, listening, waiting. At the dinner table, the conversations became shorter. My son spoke mostly to her. When I joined in, the words felt misplaced, like I had entered a conversation already finished. Sometimes, she would answer me with a single word. Sometimes, not at all. I began eating faster. I began excusing myself early. I did not want to be a burden. I did not want to be the reason for discomfort. One afternoon, I offered to help with the groceries. She said, "I've already done it." Her voice was calm, but her back was turned. Another day, I folded the laundry, the way I always had. Later, I found the clothes unfolded again, neatly stacked, as if my hands had been erased. That night, I sat on my bed and stared at the wall. I tried to understand what I had done wrong. I replayed conversations in my head. I searched for mistakes, for moments where I might have crossed a line without knowing. Nothing stood out. That made it harder, because how do you fix something you cannot see? My son noticed the distance, but he did not know how to name it. He was tired from work. He loved us both, and love, I learned, does not always come with answers. One evening, he asked gently, "Are you okay, Ma?" I smiled. I always smiled. "I'm fine," I said, and he believed me. As the weeks passed, the house began to feel quieter, not peaceful, just quiet, the kind of quiet that carries weight. I spent more time in my room. I read old letters. I looked at photographs. There was one photo I returned to often. My son as a boy, standing beside me, his hand wrapped around mine, his smile wide and careless. He had trusted the world then. I wondered when I had stopped trusting it too. Sometimes, I would hear my daughter-in-law sigh when she saw my shoes by the door. Sometimes, she would clean the table again after I had already wiped it. None of it was cruel. None of it was loud. And that is what made it painful, because I could not point to a single moment and say, "This is where it began." It was everywhere and nowhere. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, I overheard another conversation. She said, "I feel like I can't breathe here." My son's voice was low. "What do you want me to do?" There was a pause. Then she said, "I just want our life back." I sat very still in my room. I did not move. Her words settled into me slowly, like dust. Our life back. I realized then that I was no longer part of the picture she saw when she imagined peace. That night, I barely slept. The rain continued outside, steady and patient. I listened to it fall and wondered when I had started feeling like an extra piece in my own family. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The house was dark and quiet. I made myself a cup of tea and stood by the window, watching the street wake up. I thought about leaving on my own, about packing quietly, about disappearing without forcing anyone to say the words out loud. But then my son came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Ma," he said, and I stayed. Because leaving without being asked felt like giving up something I had not yet lost. But the distance kept growing. There were days when my daughter-in-law barely spoke to me at all. When she did, her words were careful, measured, like steps on thin ice. I tried to talk to her once, just once. I said, "If I've done something wrong, please tell me." She looked surprised, almost uncomfortable. She said, "No, it's nothing like that." But she did not say anything else. Nothing was worse than something. I began to feel small in ways I never had before. I questioned my presence, my habits. Even my breathing felt too loud at times. I missed my old home. I missed being needed. Some evenings, I sat at the dining table alone after everyone had gone to bed. The chair across from me stayed empty. The light above flickered softly. I imagined saying what I really felt. "I'm scared. ADR. I don't know where I belong anymore. I don't want to lose my son." But the words stayed inside me because I had learned something important by then. In some homes, silence is not peace. It is preparation. And without knowing it, we were all walking toward a moment that would change everything. The day everything changed did not begin any differently from the others. There was no warning, no heavy feeling in the air when I woke up, no sign that this would be the day my life shifted. I remember the morning clearly. The sky was pale and cloudy, not dark, not bright, just quiet. I made my tea and sat by the window, watching people walk past the house. Everyone seemed to know where they were going. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. Later that afternoon, my daughter-in-law asked me if we could talk. Her voice was gentle, almost kind. "Can we speak for a moment?" she said. I nodded and followed her into the kitchen. The room was clean, too clean. The counters were clear. The chairs were pushed in neatly. It felt less like a kitchen and more like a place prepared for something serious. My son was not there. That was the first thing I noticed. She stood across from me, her hands folded together. She took a small breath before she spoke, as if she had practiced this moment many times. "I've been thinking a lot," she said. I waited. She continued, "I don't think this living situation is working." Her words were calm, measured. There was no anger in her voice. That calmness made it harder to respond. I asked softly, "What do you mean?" She looked down for a moment, then back up at me. "I need space," she said. "I need to feel like this is my home." I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my face still. "I understand," I said, even though I didn't. "Not fully." She nodded, as if relieved. "I think it would be best if you found another place to stay," she added. There it was. The sentence that had been forming for weeks, maybe months, finally stepped into the open. For a moment, the room felt very quiet. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Each sound landed heavily in my ears. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to explain myself. I wanted to say that I had tried, but none of that came out. Instead, I smiled. It was a small smile, a tired one. "All right," I said. She looked surprised. Maybe she expected resistance. Maybe she expected tears. I gave her neither. "I'll start looking," I added. She nodded again. "Thank you for understanding." Understanding. That word stayed with me. I walked back to my room slowly. Each step felt deliberate, like I was memorizing the floor beneath my feet. I closed the door and sat on the bed. That was when the weight of it finally reached me. I was being asked to leave my son's home, the place he had invited me into, the place where I thought I would grow old quietly. I did not cry right away. I sat there and looked around the room. The small table, the chair by the window, the drawer where I kept old letters and photographs. Everything looked the same, and yet none of it felt secure anymore. When my son came home that evening, he found me sitting quietly. He asked, "Ma, is everything okay?" I looked at him, really looked at him. He seemed tired, torn, like someone carrying more than they knew how to hold. "She spoke to you," he said carefully. I nodded. He sat beside me. I didn't know how to say this. he began. I stopped him gently. I placed my hand over his. "It's all right," I said. "I understand. It's Davin Days is." My voice sounded steady, but inside me, something was unraveling. He looked at me with confusion and guilt in his eyes. "You don't have to rush," he said. "We'll figure something out." I smiled again. That smile had become my shield. That night, I began packing, not because I was told to hurry, not because anyone pushed me, but because staying felt heavier than leaving. I packed slowly. I folded each piece of clothing carefully, as if it deserved respect. I held onto objects longer than necessary. A scarf, a book, a small frame with a photo of my son and me. I remembered the day that photo was taken. He was young. He had laughed that day, truly laughed. I placed the frame gently into my bag. In the following days, the house felt strange, polite, careful. Everyone moved around each other like strangers. No one mentioned the future. No one asked how I felt, and I realized something painful. The decision had already been made long before the words were spoken. All that remained was for me to accept it. The morning I left, the sky looked much like it had the day before. Pale, quiet. I stood at the door with my bag in my hand. My daughter-in-law stood a few steps away. My son stood between us. There were no hugs, no long goodbyes, just a soft, uncomfortable pause. "I'll call you," my son said. "I know," I replied, and then I stepped outside. The door closed behind me with a gentle sound, but inside me, it echoed loudly. The place I moved into was small, one room, one narrow window, a single light that hummed softly when it was turned on. When I first stepped inside, the silence felt unfamiliar, not the quiet of a sleeping house, but the quiet of a place that had not yet learned my name. I placed my bag on the floor and stood still for a moment. I listened. There were sounds outside, distant traffic, a dog barking far away, someone closing a door. But inside the room, there was nothing. That was when the tears came. They did not come suddenly. They came slowly. I sat on the edge of the bed and let them fall without wiping them away. I cried for the home I had left. I cried for the years I thought I would spend there. I cried for my son, and for myself, and for the version of our family that no longer existed. When the tears stopped, I felt empty, but also lighter. The first nights were the hardest. I lay awake listening to my own breathing. I missed the sounds. I once found annoying footsteps in the hallway, the television playing in another room, the soft clatter of dishes. Loneliness has a way of making memories louder. I unpacked slowly. I placed my clothes in the small cupboard. I set the photo frame on the table near the bed. I made the space mine, one careful movement at a time. In the mornings, I made my tea and sat by the window. I watched the light change. I watched strangers pass by. Everyone seemed to be moving forward, and I felt like I was standing still. My son called a few days later. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. And this time, it was partly true. We spoke about small things. Work, the weather, nothing important. We avoided the weight between us, as if it might break the connection if we touched it. After the call ended, I held the phone in my hand for a long time. I realized then that love does not disappear. It only changes shape. Days turned into weeks. I found a rhythm. I cooked simple meals. I took short walks in the evening. Sometimes, I would pass homes with lights glowing warmly inside. Families gathered around tables, laughter spilling through open windows. I felt a familiar ache, but I did not stop walking. I began writing letters I never planned to send. I wrote about how I felt, about the things I wished I had said, about the moments I replayed in my mind. Writing gave my thoughts somewhere to rest. I did not blame my daughter-in-law anymore. Not completely. I began to see things more clearly. She wanted a home that felt like her own. She wanted space. She wanted a life where she did not feel watched or crowded. And I, without meaning to, had been a reminder of a life before her. That realization hurt, but it also softened something inside me. I thought about my own younger self, about the things I once wanted. about the fears I never spoke aloud. I understood that sometimes people protect their peace in ways that hurt others. That does not make them cruel. It makes them human. One afternoon, I received a message from my son. "Can we meet?" he wrote. We met at a small cafe. He looked older somehow, more tired. We sat across from each other, the space between us filled with words neither of us knew how to say. "I'm sorry," he said finally. I reached across the table and held his hand. "I know," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked at me. "You didn't deserve that," he said quietly. I shook my head gently. "Everyone deserves to feel at home," I said. "Even her." We sat there in silence for a while. It was not uncomfortable. It was honest. When we stood to leave, he hugged me. The hug was tight, careful, full of things he could not say. As I walked back to my room that evening, I felt something I had not felt in a long time: peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had stopped fighting what had already happened. I began to forgive, not out loud, not all at once, just quietly, inside myself. Life did not suddenly become bright after that. There were still quiet evenings, still moments when the ache returned without warning, still days when I missed the sound of my son moving through the house. But the pain no longer felt sharp. It softened, like a memory that had learned where it belonged. I began to understand something important in that small room with the narrow window. Home is not always a place that keeps you. Sometimes it is a place that prepares you to let go. I stopped waiting for apologies that might never come. I stopped replaying the moment in the kitchen, wishing I had said something different. Some words are never meant to be spoken. Some moments are meant to pass quietly. I focused on what I still had. I had my mornings. I had my tea by the window. I had my strength, even if it came wrapped in sadness. My son visited sometimes. We talked gently. We did not reopen old wounds. We built something new instead, something quieter, something honest. He would ask, "Are you all right, Ma?" And this time, I would answer without smiling. "Yes," I would say, and I meant it. I never returned to live in that house, and that was okay. Some doors close not to punish us, but to guide us elsewhere. I learned that love does not always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it steps back. Sometimes it chooses silence. Sometimes it lets go so that everyone can breathe again. I do not carry anger with me anymore. I carry understanding. And if there is one thing I have learned from all of this, it is this: you can lose a place and still keep your dignity. You can be asked to leave and still walk forward with grace. And you can begin again, even when your heart feels tired. Tonight, as I sit by the window and watch the world move quietly outside, I feel something gentle settle inside me. Not happiness, not sadness, but peace, and sometimes that is enough.